In his room, Arthur lay in bed, looking exhausted and muttering, "The moon is too far away." Meanwhile, outside, birds were chirping happily to welcome the sunny morning at Zyra's academy. Arthur, with Sylvie on his shoulder, walked through the corridors of the academy. He mumbles to Sylvie, "Looks like we're here." Sylvie meows in agreement. Arthur is standing in front of the door to the disciplinary committee room. Several students walked by behind him. Arthur thought, "This is it." He opened the door, curious to see what the so-called strongest students of Zyra's academy looked like. As soon as the door opened, the lion roared at Arthur. Startled, Arthur staggered back. Kai Kressless, a young man with silvery blonde hair, watched the scene with an amused smile. Kai commented, "This plan didn't go as planned." Arthur, realizing that Kai was deliberately testing him, asked, "I thought this was an elaborate plan to see how thick my skin is." Kai replied, You could say that." He looked at Arthur and said, "Looks like Director Goodsky has recruited someone interesting." He continued in a meaningful tone, "It could be because of ability, or perhaps ... different connections." Kai looked at Arthur with a searching look and muttered, "Blood doesn't lie." Arthur, disturbed by Kai's words, asked, "Excuse me?" Kai ignored Arthur's question and held out his hand. "By the way, my name is Kai Kressless, 4th year. You can just call me Kai." Arthur shook his hand back and introduced himself. "Arthur Lewin, nice to meet you." Arthur introduced Sylvie to Kai, "And this is my partner, Sylvie." Sylvie smugly snorted at the lion. A surprised Kai muttered, "Biso." Kai wondered what kind of beast could make Grotter so obedient. Suddenly a woman said, Another weak pretty boy." Dordrea Orgard, a light purple-haired girl, looked at them with a displeased expression. Dordrea muttered irritably, "Why aren't there more real men on this committee?" Looking at Arthur. Arthur reintroduced himself. "I'm Arthur Lewin. I'm a 1st year like you. Let's get along." Dordrea patted Arthur's hand and said, "Stop that stiff attitude." Kai interrupted, "Come on. The other members of the disciplinary committee are waiting in the other room." Kai explained, "Goodsky didn't even tell us your name, let alone any other details, so everyone is very curious." Dordrea pulled Arthur aside and said, "Everyone. The last person is here," a young man says. "I knew it." Arthur looks a bit surprised. Curtis approaches him and exclaims, "It's really you, Arthur." Arthur smiles. Curtis, "Why am I not surprised?" Curtis commented, "I know Kai brought Grotter to scare you guys, but it seems like the opposite happened." Curtis was surprised to see Sylvie. Arthur asked, "Wait, so this is your partner? And is this the world lion you bought at the auction when we first met?" Curtis replies, "He is. We made a deal last year after he reached a class." Arthur congratulated Curtis. Curtis replied, "Good to see you again." Curtis replies, "And welcome to the disciplinary committee." They shake hands. Kai and Dordrea are surprised to see that they have already met. Curtis explains, "It's not just you." Kath appears on the stairs. Kath comes down the stairs and says to Arthur, "Good to see you again." Arthur replies, "Good to see you too, Princess Kathleen." Kath nods. Farith asks, "Did you forget someone?" Farith appears and says, "Long time no see, Arthur." Arthur looks at Farith in confusion. "Excuse me, do I know you?" Farith replies loudly, "It's me." Farith Ivysaur 3, Arthur exclaimed. "Ah." Arthur exclaimed happily. Farith protested, "I may be a 1st year like you, but I'm still a few years older than you, so please treat me with respect." Arthur replied, Sure, and joked, "It seems like only yesterday that I knocked you out with one punch." Good memories. Farith is annoyed. "You're doing this on purpose, aren't you?" And a female voice can be heard saying, "Looks like we're the only strangers here. Huh, Theo?" Claire introduces herself. "I'm Claire Bladeheart, 6th year combat mage student and also the leader of this little group." Arthur looks pensive. Arthur asks Claire Bladeheart, "Are you related to Caspian Bladeheart?" Claire replies, "Oh, you know my uncle?" Arthur replied, No, I just used to hear a lot of great things about Caspian Bladeheart's powers from my father." Claire explained, my uncle started training me as soon as I woke up. So many of my techniques are similar to his, but I'm glad you recognized his name. Theo suddenly said, looks like the disciplinary committee has sunk low enough to recruit irresponsible people. Theo holds out his hand to Arthur. Arthur shakes his hand. Arthur shakes Theo's hand. He is surprised and realizes that Theo is using gravity magic. Arthur thinks, is he testing me? He channels mana to strengthen himself. If it weren't for the assimilation of my body with Beastwell Sylvia, I don't think I'd be standing right now. Theo commented, not bad. Kai clapped his hands and said, I guess Arthur doesn't just have good looks. Kai comments, Faithy here fell to the ground when Theo did that to her. Farith protests, I'm a sorcerer and Arthur's an augmenter. Do not confuse me with a brute like him. Kai interrupts, now, enough with the jokes. He reminded them, we have to put on a serious face for the club's recruitment announcement. It's the first time the disciplinary committee members will show their faces to the rest of the students. Arthur said, wait, I don't know, I haven't prepared anything yet. Curtis reassured Arthur, there is no need to prepare anything. The student council will make the announcement. Arthur said, I'm sure having an A-class mana monster beside us will help. Claire clapped her hands and said, all right. Claire encouraged, let's show all the entitled students out there what they can expect if they choose to break the rules. A student council representative stood at the podium and said, now that all the rules have been announced, the student council would like to formally introduce to you a committee handpicked by the director to resolve and prevent disputes among students, as well as enforce punishments for troublemakers. In order to maintain peace and safety for all students, please join me in welcoming them. Disciplinary Committee. The members of the Disciplinary Committee entered the room, led by Claire and followed by Grotter, who was carrying Sylvie. Under a bright blue sky dotted with white clouds stands the majestic building of the Xyrus Academy with its classic European-style architecture. Arched windows adorn the facade of the building, which is dominated by white and blue colors. Inside the academy, the students whispered. They recognized Arthur, one of the discipline committee CC officers they had seen at the club's initiation ceremony. Some students were jealous that Arthur, a first-year scholarship wizard, had made it to the CC. They suspected that Arthur had connections. Another student commented that all DK officers must be very strong. Elijah comments on how popular Arthur is as a DK officer. Arthur, with his reddish-brown hair tied back, seems bothered by the attention he receives. His friend, a student with glasses, says that DK's black uniform, which only 8 students in the entire school have, attracts more attention. A professor puts a book on the table and makes a noise that silences the whole class. Professor Avius, dressed in blue and gold academic robes, introduces himself and begins the basic theory of mana class. He realizes that the students are probably talking about something more interesting. Professor Avius asks for the students' attention and emphasizes the importance of the material to be covered in the basic theory class. Professor Avius promises many fun projects and assignments. He then discusses the stigma of witches are better than augmenters. Professor Avius explained that in the past, when reaching the orange mana core was very difficult, mages had a huge advantage over augmenters due to their more advanced mana vessels, which were responsible for absorbing and transporting mana to the mana core. Meanwhile, augmenters had more advanced mana channels that were responsible for distributing mana from the core to the rest of the body. Because of their efficiency in absorbing mana, mages are more likely to ascend to higher core levels. Professor Avius explained that as both types of witches reach higher core levels, this difference becomes less significant. Mages will find it easier to distribute mana throughout their bodies, while augmenters will have better control in manipulating mana remotely. Professor Avius asked the class, if a mage and an augmenter both reach silver core, who would benefit? Professor Avius answers his own question, that the mage who trains his core and body will have a greater advantage. The class continued with some of the witch students refuting Professor Avius' claims. The discussion was based on hypotheses and recorded duels between high-ranking magicians, but still opened the students' minds. The bell rings. Arthur and his friend plan to have lunch together. Arthur asks his friend to save his place in line if he arrives first. Arthur sits alone in his next class, thinking that this class might be more interesting. He feels like he hasn't sat still for a long time. Kathleen in DK uniform approaches Arthur and asks if she can sit next to him. Arthur lets her, even though there are many empty seats. Kathleen is grateful. Farith, Arthur, and Kathleen. She introduces herself as Farith Ivesar III and calls Arthur her rival. Arthur asks when they became rivals. The professor says that there is no better way to learn than through direct experience. He also pays attention to Arthur. The professor recognizes Arthur as the one who humiliated him. He thinks this is the perfect opportunity to humiliate Arthur. The professor entices Arthur to volunteer. Arthur is aware of the professor's tactics. The professor is honored to teach the DK members and expresses his curiosity to see what they are capable of. The professor is pleased with Farith's willingness. Farith is honored to have the professor's guidance and suspects that the professor's level is higher than hers, as she cannot feel the professor's mana core. Farith volunteered to stand in for DK. He introduced himself and expressed his willingness to show off his skills. The professor and Mentor said he would only use ranged attacks. He thought that if he lost, at least he would have a reason. Farith started with the water domain spell. Arthur is impressed that Farith knows the spell domain. Farith creates a water creature to attack the professor. The professor easily dodges and blocks Farith's attacks. Arthur is impressed by the professor's skill. Farith launches more attacks, but the professor continues to dodge them. The professor finally hits Farith. He asks if Farith will give up. Farith surrenders. Arthur wonders if the professor is humiliating Farith on purpose. The professor smiles mischievously. In what appears to be a courtroom, Farith wears a black uniform with gold accents. Arthur and Kathleen Long sit side by side at the table. Farith is praised for her work. The professor asks if anyone else from the disciplinary committee would like to speak. Kath, the girl with the long black hair, raises her hand and offers to volunteer. Arthur is surprised. The professor is surprised by Kath's willingness to serve. The brown-haired man with the head covering expresses his surprise that Kath also volunteered. He did not expect Kath to volunteer. Kath nods and begins to collect mana. She points her wand at the brown-haired man with the head covering. The professor noticed that Kath did not react much. She decides to go ahead and collect the mana in her hand. The professor shoots fire at Kath. Kath deflects the fire attack with ice magic. Kath shoots ice at the brown-haired man in the hat and tells him to shoot. The professor shields himself with fire magic as the ice hits him. He then twists his body to create a fire vortex to deflect the smaller ice attacks. The brown-haired man with the headdress praises Kath, saying that she was very impressive and as expected of a princess. Kath then collects more ice in the air. Kath shoots ice at the brown-haired man with the headdress. The man deflects with a fireball in the air. The brown-haired man with the hood declares that Kath's attack will not work on him. Kath creates a tornado of ice. Farith and Arthur are shocked and wonder what Kath is doing. Kath is attacked but has no time to parry. Farith says to herself that she is not protecting herself. She is just concentrating on this dangerous attack. Arthur is suddenly near Kathleen and stops the fight, saying that this game has gone on long enough and this has gone too far. Arthur asks the brown-haired man if he agrees. The man looks angry. Arthur explains that while he appreciates the man's concern for Kath, it is not necessary as he controls everything. Arthur claims that he is in control of the situation and will call off the demonstration. Arthur accuses the brown-haired man with the head covering of lying. He explains that the spell cannot be undone once it is fully activated, but Kath is unharmed. Arthur decides to force the professor's hand. He offers to replace his colleague for this demonstration. The professor accepts. The professor approaches Kath and says that the demonstration seems to be over. He asks Kath not to misunderstand. Kath says that your help is not needed, but thanks you anyway. Arthur assures Kath that she will be fine. Arthur asks to learn directly from the professor. Arthur asks the brown-haired man with the head covering to continue.